Hi, I'm Russell Graves, and in today's Wildlife Photo Show video, I'm going to talk about 5 essential pieces of equipment that I think every beginning nature photographer ought to have. I'm coming to you from the barn at Hackberry Farm, so stay with me all the way to the end. I've got a special gift for you. Let's get started. On today's video, 5 pieces of equipment I think every beginning wildlife photographer ought to have. I guess it's really open for debate. There's a lot of different pieces of equipment that you ought to have, but through tried and true methods, these are the things I think if you're just now getting started in nature photography and you're wanting to build a good solid base of equipment, this is a place you can start from and then add to it as your skills improve and you dive deeper into the craft. So the first thing is a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Now, you don't have to buy the latest or greatest. In fact, you don't have to buy any of this stuff brand new. I mean, the new equipment has its merits, but also used equipment has its merits. I tell people all the time, if you think you've got to have the latest and greatest piece of equipment to make good images, then you also have to accept that good pictures weren't made until that camera was invented. And that's just not the case. I started shooting digital images, gave up on film, started shooting digital images in about 2005, I believe it was. So for 20 years now, I've been shooting digital images. And some of the first pictures I took with those early digital cameras that were like 6.3 megapixels in size are still good cameras today. Now, I wouldn't go back and buy something that old, but also, if I'm getting started, I wouldn't have a problem with going back and buying a camera that's 2 or 3 generations ago from the latest and greatest now. So in other words, go back 10 years and buy something. You can go on used sites like mpb.com or keh.com or bnhphoto.com and buy great used gear that's been certified by the company that still works. Sometimes they give it a little bit of a warranty, but overall it'll be nice on your budget and give you a good place to start. Now, I think if you're really learning now, you can't beat mirrorless cameras for their ability to kind of what you see is what you get. You look through the camera, you can adjust in real time the aperture or the shutter speed, and you can actually see the results you're going to get through the viewfinder. It's a great way of learning how the exposure triangle works in real time. But this also to say you can still get good pictures with older DSLR models as well. So I think the first piece of equipment, buy you a solid camera, buy one that works, understand how it works, get good with the fundamentals, and those cameras will serve you for a long time. The second thing I think every beginning nature photographer have, it starts with the lenses. And I think you can't go wrong with going with like the holy trinity, what some people call it, of lenses. And so the first lens I'm going to talk about is a wide angle lens. 16 to 35 millimeter. I know with Canon they make a 17 to 35 millimeter f2.8 that's less expensive than the 16 to 35 millimeter, especially if you buy them in the EF mount, the older lenses. Again, this is a good reason to buy older lenses because I've got a whole bevy of older lenses with my Canon cameras, and when you put the adapter on, they work just fine. So think about getting a wide angle zoom. That'll give you a good niche for doing landscape photography, even some really creative wildlife photography if you can get close where you've got an animal in the foreground and you can see the background using the wide angle lens around it. But I think a good place to start is some sort of wide angle lens. If you can't find a 16 to 35, another good lens, which I think may be my favorite to put in its place, is like a 24 to 105 zoom. That focal length, forever I didn't have it, but when I finally bought it, it's one of my go-to lenses all the time now. It's really, really versatile. You can't get as wide a scene as what you can with the 16 millimeter, but I think the amount you give up and the amount of focal length you get from the 24 to 105 is a really, really good place to start. So if I'm starting off, again, to recap, I'm looking at a 16 to 35 millimeter or a 24 to 105, or better yet, if you can get a good deal on them, buy both of them. The third piece of gear I think you should buy, and the second in this lens in this list, is a 70 to 200 millimeter zoom. Forever, that was my go-to lens. I remember when I first got started in wildlife photography back in the late 80s, early 90s, that's the biggest lens I had. And what that lens did for me was it gave me a little bit of zoom. 200 millimeters is not a lot, but really what it did was it taught me field craft because I knew I had to get close to animals to get a good picture of them. One of my most memorable pictures I've ever taken, and I've had a video, I'll link it below, in the past where I've talked about it. The first really good picture I knew I took, I was using, I think, a 200 millimeter lens when I shot that picture. It was a coyote. I was so close to the animal, and it was really neat. That was a really neat experience to get to experience being that close to it. But it taught me how to get closer to animals. So if you've got is your first foray into telephoto lenses, a 70 to 200. If you can afford it, an f2.8. lens, again, you can buy them used, relatively inexpensive, or if you want to get a 70 to 200 millimeter f4 lens, that's a good compromise as well. Either way, if you decide one of these days you want to get a teleconverter, both of those focal lengths lend themselves well to adding a teleconverter to, and it'll give you even a little more extra reach. The fourth thing on my list of 5 things that I believe every beginning nature photographer should have is the third lens in the lineup, and I believe you should get a telephoto lens. Now you can get a fixed telephoto lens, or you can get a zoom lens. I know a lot of different manufacturers make really great zoom lenses now. The 150 to 600 millimeter zoom range that I know third parties like Sigma and Tokina make, or Tamron make. The Canon makes a 1 to 500. I think Nikon makes a 150 to 600 millimeter, I believe. But there's a lot of different zoom ranges you can get, or you can get a fixed focal length. It doesn't really matter. My first big lens I ever had is before they made these zooms like they have today, was a 500 millimeter lens, and I thought that was a good focal length to help me get a little extra reach for shooting pictures of wildlife. But the key thing is, again, like everything else, you get the lens, you understand how to use it, you understand how to use it from a fundamental standpoint, and it's going to make a lot of difference in terms of your success. So the fifth thing that I think every beginning nature photographer should have and learn how to use and use religiously, and this may be one of the most low-tech pieces of equipment, but might be one of the most important pieces of equipment that will add a lot of value to your kit. It'll increase the number of keepers you get, and it will eliminate a lot of the mistakes you make, and that's a tripod. I can't tell you how valuable a good tripod is to your overall camera equipment, whether you're a beginning photographer or an advanced photographer. I heard one photographer say one time, the only pictures you should use a tripod on are the ones you want to keep, or the ones you want to make good. So tripods are a really, really valuable piece of equipment. When I was a young photographer, I started getting where I was taking some pretty good pictures, but they just weren't out of this world. They just lacked a little something. I showed my pictures to a mentor friend of mine. He says, "Do you have a good tripod?" And I said, "No, I can handhold good enough." And he said, "Go out and get a tripod." And so I took his advice. I did get a tripod, started using it religiously, and overnight it made that big a difference on my pictures. And I think the same still holds true today. Good camera handling technique is one of those fundamentals of photography that if you get it right and you do it religiously, you have a hard time outrunning it, have a hard time making mistakes that will go against good camera handling techniques. And one of those techniques is, especially if you're shooting a telephoto lens, use a tripod. Anytime you magnify an image with like a telephoto lens, you're going to introduce shake into it. And so a tripod is going to help take that shake away. Even if you're shooting a wide angle lens, a tripod makes you slow down and be really, really deliberate in your compositions. And it helps that way as well. Plus, it's a must if you're doing nighttime star trails, if you're doing slow water exposures. Even when you're shooting wildlife with telephoto, you can get away with shooting wildlife at like 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second if you've got your camera locked down on a good tripod. So the fifth piece of equipment that I think is absolutely valuable to beginning wildlife photographers is, we talked about a good camera. It doesn't have to be a brand new one, it can be a used one. The lenses, like a 24 to 105 or a 16 to 35 millimeter, a 70 to 200 zoom, and some sort of telephoto is going to work great. And then the fifth thing is a tripod. Okay, so I know I said 5 things, but I'm going to add 2 more pieces of equipment to the list that I think will be a good investment of your time. And these pieces of equipment aren't that expensive, but they're going to add a lot of versatility to your kit. The first thing is a set of extension tubes. Now, I'm not an optical physicist. I don't know why this works, but for some reason, if you use extension tubes, which are essentially like teleconverters, but there's no glass in the middle of them. They're just empty inside. There's no glass at all. But when you put an extension tube between your camera body and the lens, all of a sudden it turns it into a macro lens. So if you're wanting an inexpensive way to shoot bugs or smaller creatures or flowers that are really, really close, use extension tubes. You can buy a third-party set of extension tubes, or you can buy a used set within your own camera make for probably around $100. They're not that expensive, but they'll be really, really valuable addition to your bag to be able to, again, use those lenses not only for their intended purpose, but also use them as close focus, macro focusing lenses. And then the second thing I think is valuable, and I wish someone would have told me about these a long, long time ago, but it's a 5-in-1 reflector. And what a 5-in-1 reflector allows you to do is, in times of marginal light or if something's backlit, it allows you to bounce light from the sun or any other kind of light source into your subject. They're invaluable for shooting pictures of of flowers or bugs or something like that where you can bounce light onto the subject. They're also really valuable for taking pictures of people. If you're shooting pictures of people in the outdoors, you can use reflectors to bounce light back into their face or under the rims of caps. Really gives them a nice golden glow or kind of a clean light glow, whatever side you decide to use. And then lastly, you can use them as a scrim. If you've got overhead light and you need to add a little shadow to a flower or something, it allows you to put that shade over a flower and really soften the light of underneath the reflector, and just really increases your time you can shoot, increases the amount of versatility your old kit has. And really the way you get better at photography is just to go out and experiment and take pictures and take pictures and take pictures. So there's my 5 things with a couple of bonus items that I think every beginning nature photographer ought to have. So what are your things? Is there any piece of equipment you think are necessary? Be sure to put it in the comments below. If you like what you watched and heard today, be sure to like and subscribe our videos. It really does help us out a lot. And if you want your set of free nature photography cheat sheets, head on over to hackberryfarm.com, put in your email address, and those cheat sheets will be delivered directly to your inbox. Thanks a lot.